Hi, would you like to visit the first synagogue in the Americas? My name is Daniel, and I'll be glad to guide you. Anytime you want, call on me for information. Jewish history in Brazil began with the first sailors who landed in these American shores. Among them were many new Christians, Jews who were forced to be baptized into the Catholic faith after 1497, and who came to the New World searching for a new life far away from the reach of the Inquisition. Sugar was the main product of the new Portuguese colony. The new Christians were the main link between Pernambuco and the European markets, sending their sugar to Jewish merchants in Amsterdam and Antwerp. As their influence grew in the colony, the courts of the Inquisition came to Pernambuco to seek out possible Catholic heterodoxy and secret Judaism in particular. Many of them were arrested in late 16th century, taken to Lisbon and forced to deny their true belief, Judaism. The Inquisition held its control through discrimination and persecution until 1630, when the Dutch took control of the northeast of Brazil and the sugar trade. The Dutch brought with them the religious tolerance and freedom they kept in the Netherlands. In 1630, the Dutch West Indies Company invaded the northeastern part of Brazil. Waves of Portuguese Jews from Amsterdam began to immigrate to Dutch Brazil. During the 24 years of Dutch rule in Pernambuco, the Jews were free to practice their religion. After years of hiding, new Christians were able to return to Judaism, praying openly and practicing circumcision. Jews were half of the free white population of Recife, playing an important part in the economic and social life of the Dutch colony. They were the most important brokers and sugar merchants, and they also traded slaves. Because they spoke both the Dutch and Portuguese languages, they became the link between the two colonial powers. For some Orthodox Calvinists, it was outrageous that the Jews had even more freedom in the colony than they had in Holland. The Dutch government, in particular Governor Johann Maurits van Nassau, looked after them in order to guarantee their freedom. In 1999, excavations found 8 different levels above the original 17th century floor, revealing the original level of the street and probably that of the whole city. Here you can see the remains of the inner walls, which used to separate 3 rooms, used perhaps for meetings or studies. The excavations also give us important information about the urban growth of Recife. In the 17th century, Recife was a narrow strip of land, only 80 meters wide. The living space was so narrow that waves from the rivers beat against the back of the houses. This is why the Dutch and the Jews had to build a retaining wall against the water. During the diggings, this wall was discovered along the back of the synagogue, also showing that the building used to have a shorter length than it does now. So today, all the buildings are not the original size, and the architecture of the street is different. A 17th century Dutch painting shows the street as it was then, when it was called the Street of the Jews. Today, the street has lost its Dutch architectural heritage, as most of the buildings were rebuilt in new classical style that characterized the last 19th and early 20th century. In the third room at the north of the building, there was an access to the southern part where the mikvah was located. Before the synagogue was built, the Jews would hold services in a private house. There the merchant Duarte Saraiva, one of the most important members of the community. As the community grew and thrived, Saraiva bought a spot for the construction of the synagogue. In 1642, the first synagogue of the Americas was finished. It was called Zur Israel, the Rock of Israel. About that same time, one of the most important rabbis of the era was sent from Amsterdam, Rabbi Isaac Abu Abda Fonseca. He would be the first and only rabbi of the congregation, and thus the first rabbi in the Americas. His poem, Zecher Siti Leniflotel, written in 1646, makes him also the first Jewish author in the Americas. The community thrived, and another synagogue was built, this time in the new city called Morris City, across the river. The smaller sister was called Magen Abraham, Shield of Abraham, and was under the administrative control of the Zur Israel. The rules and record books called the Haskamot of both of these congregations can still be seen at the Beit Chaim Library in Amsterdam. Dating from 1648, the book contains about 180 signatures referring to the men of the community at that time. This is the most important archaeological discovery on this site. A well beside a mikveh, the pool for the Jewish purification bath. The original mikveh was destroyed when the Dutch and Jews were expelled from Brazil, but its place was found filled with earth, what helped the archaeologists to identify it. Certainty came when a rabbinical committee verified that this really was the mikveh based on the measurements of the filled-in space and of the well. It confirmed that this was the site of the first synagogue in America. What you see here is a reconstruction of the mikveh, based on the archaeological research, which gives us an idea of its original size and depth. In 1645, a Portuguese riot marked the beginning of a long fight by the Portuguese, which in 1654 managed to expel the Dutch. For the Jews, this meant the return of Portuguese intolerance as expressed through the Inquisition. By an agreement between the Portuguese and the Dutch, the Jews were given 3 months to sell all their goods and leave Brazil. They were given 16 ships to make the ocean crossing. It took 350 years for the synagogue to be reopened. Here are some artifacts found during the excavation: Portuguese and Dutch porcelain, pipes and pottery. We cannot be sure that these objects were actually used by the Jews, as the building was occupied by Portuguese soldiers at the end of the Dutch occupation. The little piece in the middle, which has a menorah drawn on it, is a clear indication of the Jewish presence in this place. Documents about the synagogue make it clear that the ceremony room was on the top floor. Here you can see a reconstruction of that room. The reconstruction was based on other contemporary Portuguese synagogues, especially those in Holland and in other Dutch colonies in the Caribbean, in which the shape and placement of the furniture and the artistic motifs in the ceiling were inspired. The shape of the benches remind us of similar 17th century sugar mill benches. It is possible to identify the modifications the building has suffered during its more than 350 years of existence. The north wall is probably original, up to the level of the brick wall. The stones were added when the building was restored in the 18th century, which turned the house into a 3-story building. If you look at the same level of the bricks on the southern wall, you can see the marks of the original ceiling beams. During the 19th or early 20th century, the building was restored again, and it went back to having 2 floors. Its facade was destroyed, however, and the new one was designed in keeping with the French influence on architecture at that time. Local historians have been working since the 19th century to recover this history. Professor Gonçalves de Melo in the 20th century was the leading authority on the Dutch period and the first to refer to the importance of the Jewish community. His research into Dutch archives turned up many important documents, and he was the first to indicate precisely where the synagogue was located. In 1999, 5 institutions cooperated to begin excavating the site: the Ministry of Culture, the City of Recife, the local and national Israelite federations, and the Safra Foundation. When the museum opened in December 2001, it also housed the Jewish Historical Archive of Pernambuco, today the Research and Information Center of Reference for Jewish History and Culture in Brazil.